They say every house has a soul, but this one, this manor, has something more. It breathes. Not in the way lungs do, of course. No air passes through its halls in a steady rhythm, no diaphragm rising and falling in sleep. And yet, when I step over the threshold and the doors sigh shut behind me, I feel the inhale. A pulling in of presence, of possibility. Morphos Manor is not a place one finds on accident. It is not pinned on any map, nor written in any guide. The roads that lead here shift like ribbons in the wind, appearing, disappearing, beckoning only those who are meant to see. I've never met another soul who arrived by chance. And even still, I sometimes wonder if I found it at all, or if it found me. By candlelight, its silhouette is more suggestion than stone. Towers stretch beyond reason. Dormers blink like watchful eyes. And staircases spiral in directions that logic would never dare. The walls hum with a low ancient tone, a sound not of this world, and not quite of the next either. I don't remember the first time I saw it. Not exactly. There had been a dream. No, several, now that I think of it. A vision of a house glowing dimly in the fog, tall windows aglow from within, always just out of reach. I'd wake with the scent of lavender and wood smoke in my hair, and the echo of something brushing my fingertips. When I arrived, when I truly stepped through the gate, I half expected it to vanish the moment I blinked. But it stood firm, still, watching. Some might call it haunted. They wouldn't be wrong. But it is not ghosts that roam here. At least, not in the way you imagine. This house remembers. It carries the weight of centuries in its bones. Memories cling to the tapestries like dust, the whispers of long-forgotten voices curling into corners and hiding beneath floorboards. If you sit quietly enough, if you truly listen, the walls will tell you their stories. And I have heard them. Stories of relics buried beneath moonlit gardens, of letters burned before they could be read, of doors that only open for certain hands. I have heard the manor weep, I have felt it laugh, I have watched its rooms shift for no reason but their own. There is a library here that catalogs the impossible, a conservatory where the seasons ignore the laws of time, a study that speaks in dreams. But above all, there is an archive. My archive. Though it would be more honest to say I am its. The archive collects more than objects. It collects memory, emotion, truths that have been erased. It gathers all that was lost when no one was looking, and it keeps them safe, held within the quiet pages of its endless shelves. That is where I live now, not merely in the manor, but among its histories, its aching, shimmering truths that refuse to be forgotten. And that is where you'll find me, recording, listening, telling. This is not a house of answers. It never was. But if you are patient, if you are gentle, you might hear a story meant only for you. It begins as most things do, with a name. Mine. I am Ayla Aster, archivist of Morphos Manor, and this is how my story begins. Chapter 1. A childhood wrapped in velvet hours. I was born into a house of velvet drapes and candlelight. Not the manor. No, not yet, but a tall brick house nestled just beyond the city, where the garden grew wild at the edges and every corridor seemed to hush when one passed. My earliest memories are not of magic, but of order, of the kind of wealth that speaks in silk wallpaper and polished wood, that hushes rather than announces itself. My mother adored roses, and so our trellises sagged beneath their blooms each summer. She said roses were the only flower brave enough to bleed. My father, ever the scowler, filled the drawing room with books and grandfather clocks, each one ticking slightly out of rhythm, like a symphony of time keeping its own secrets. I was not raised to be loud or seen. No, like many daughters of our standing, I was sculpted into grace, into softness, into the stillness expected of a girl who would someday host salons and sign letters with lilac ink. But I was never quite still. Even as a child, I found corners no one expected me to find. The narrow space behind the staircase where the wallpaper peeled like a secret. the low attic window where the dust motes danced like spirits in the morning sun. I whispered to shadows and kept company with clock hands. My governess once accused me of being fanciful. I thanked her. My sister, Isadora, was everything I wasn't. Perfect posture, perfect laugh, perfect plans to wed the perfect heir. I admired her, truly, but in the way one admires a marble statue. Beautiful, cold, impossibly still. She saw the world as it was. I saw the world as it might be. There was one particular room in our home that only I seemed to love. A tiny study tucked between the linen closet and the scullery, so narrow that one had to walk sideways to fit. It housed nothing but a small writing desk and a high dust-draped window, but it was there that I began my first stories. I wrote of dreams and distant lands, of girls who wore cloaks made of starlight, of houses that breathed. No one in my family read them, not out of cruelty, but disinterest. Magic was not a subject of merit in our world. It was frivolous, a child's distraction. And perhaps they were right, but even then, I knew I was writing something true, something buried deep beneath the bone. My father once caught me watching the moon far past my bedtime. He did not scold me. Instead, he lit a lantern and sat beside me on the cold marble steps of our veranda. "You look for meaning in places others overlook," he said quietly. "It'll make you lonely, and it'll make you strong." I never forgot that. When I was 14, a girl from school told me she thought I was haunted. She meant it as an insult. I took it as a compliment. I think the truth is, I was never meant to stay in that house. I loved it, but it was not mine. Its walls echoed with the dreams of others. My mother's roses, my father's clocks, my sister's symmetry. But not me. There was something waiting. A pull, like an invisible string wrapped gently around my ribs, tugging westward, forward, beyond. And I listened. Always. I listened. Chapter 2. The Pull Beyond the Garden Gate. I was 27 when the first fissure in time appeared. Not with thunder, not with fanfare, but with a hush. A silence so complete it felt like the moment after a bell stops ringing. Life as I had always known it continued to unfurl like a parchment scroll. Routine, refined, perfumed with expectations. Yet beneath that, there was a current, a hum, a soft thread pulling me gently toward a story I hadn't yet lived. It began in the gardens. Our estate, with its formal hedges and sprawling rose lanes, had always been my sanctuary. There I could vanish from debutante duties, from matchmaking whispers, from parlor expectations and corset-bound propriety. I would find solace beside the fountain in the east corner, the one with the lion's head spout forever trickling water into a mossy basin. I often sat with my journal, sketching imaginary doorways on ivy-covered walls, and scripting dialogues between ghosts and time. It was there that the air first changed. One midsummer evening, the golden hour lingered longer than it should have. The shadows were syrupy and still, and the birds paused mid-song, as though listening. I remember looking up and catching sight of a shimmer. No, a shift, in the air above the hydrangea hedge. It was a flicker, like the way heat blurs a horizon, but colder, crisper, and when I blinked, it was gone. But I felt it, like something had seen me. Over the weeks that followed, those little moments grew. A clock ticked backward when I touched it. A mirror in the attic showed not my reflection, but a stormy coastline. A letter arrived from no known sender, addressed simply to Miss Aster, archivist apparent. My fingers tingled when I held it. The ink shimmered. I kept it hidden in a music box, reading and rereading its cryptic invitation to step beyond the veil of known hours and into the fold of memory and myth. By autumn, I stopped questioning. I didn't tell my mother. She would have summoned a doctor. I didn't tell my sister. She would have feared I was chasing the ghosts of our grandmother's fancies again. I told only the garden, whispered my truth into the bark of the old elm as I packed a satchel with gloves, tea tins, and my grandfather's compass. I left at twilight. It was not a dramatic crossing. I did not tumble through a mirror or awaken another century's bedchamber. Instead, I walked the path through the woods behind the estate, past the boundary stones, and into a stretch of land I had never noticed before, though I had lived there all my life. The trees were taller, the fog was not fog, but memory itself, and the light was strange, not moonlight, not sunglow, but something older. I felt no fear, only a kind of recognition, as though my soul had studied this route long ago. And then, there it was. Morphos Manor. Not ruins, not forgotten, but waiting. Entirely intact in this impossible modern age. Gaslights glimmered behind stained glass. Ivy still curled across the stone facade, but not with decay, with reverence, as if the vines knew they were cradling something precious. The manor sat at the end of a narrow lane flanked by wild poppies and whispering reeds, utterly removed from the world of motor cars and telephone wires. A place misplaced in time, or perhaps perfectly placed beyond it. I crossed the threshold as though I had done it before. The door opened not with a creak, but with a sigh. The scent of lavender and parchment enveloped me. The floorboards didn't groan, they welcomed. The hearth in the drawing room was already lit. A tea service sat waiting, one sugar cube resting in the dish as if the house remembered exactly how I took it. There were no servants, no tenants, only the gentle warmth of a place that recognized me. And there, on the writing desk by the arched window, was the key. Not merely a physical object, though it was beautiful, brass and glass, etched with symbols that shimmered when touched. It was a key to my new purpose, my new name. From that moment, I was no longer simply Ayla Aster, the daughter of a Victorian woman. I became the keeper of stories too wild for history books, too old for the tongues of scholars. I was chosen, by fate, perhaps, or by the manor itself, to document, to archive, to breathe life into relics that no longer belonged to the world outside. I did not know yet what I would uncover. I only knew this. My life had not ended. It had begun. Chapter 3. The House That Remembers. The key was still warm in my palm when the manor fully welcomed me. It was not a tour I took. It was a receiving. The house did not need to be shown. It unfolded. Doors that had appeared flush against the wall moments before now opened without touch. Lamps bloomed to life as I entered each room, their glow neither gaslight nor electricity, but something older, like fire coaxed gently into being by memory. The drawing room, with its wisteria wallpaper and soft velvet chairs, still carried the warmth of unseen company. A gramophone played faintly in the distance, though I never found its source. The scent of lavender followed me, subtle but constant, as though the house exhaled it with every breath. In the hall, I passed portraits that I swear turned their heads back toward me when I walked by. One of a woman with silver eyes and a crow on her shoulder made my fingertips prickle. Her placard read only, "The Second Archivist." The space beneath her was empty, as though awaiting the next name to take its place. It should have frightened me. It didn't. Instead, a strange reverence settled into my bones, as if each step I took echoed forward and backward in time. The manor knew me. It had been waiting, not for a visitor, but for a return. The library came next. I opened the door and felt as though I had stepped into a cathedral of ink and parchment. Towering shelves stretched beyond sight, spiraling like tree trunks toward a domed ceiling, painted with constellations unfamiliar to any astronomer I'd known. A ladder slid of its own volition to greet me. Some books whispered as I passed, their spines humming with stories not yet told. On a pedestal near the center rested a journal bound in rose-colored leather. When I touched it, it opened to a blank page, and ink began to write itself. Ayla Aster, 3rd Archivist, arrival confirmed. I pressed my hand to the page. The ink sank into my skin. The observatory revealed itself behind a velvet curtain in the west corridor. The glass ceiling parted at my approach, revealing a sky neither night nor day, but something else, glittering with planets that pulsed softly, as though breathing. Instruments clicked and spun without being touched, charting what I could only guess were the movements of forgotten worlds. Then came the passageways. Behind the grandfather clock on the landing, behind a mirror that no longer showed my reflection, behind a panel in the music room floor. The manor was honeycombed with them, twisting, secret arteries that pulsed with light or shadow, depending on where they led. In one, I found a relic, a silver comb etched with moons and thorns, humming faintly in my hand. In another, a music box that played a lullaby I recognized from dreams I didn't remember having. And in the last, a locked cabinet that seemed to breathe as I approached it. I didn't open it, not yet, but I heard the whisper, "Welcome, Archivist." It came not from the cabinet, not even from the manor itself, but from everything. The air, the walls, the objects, the very fabric of this place. As though the house were alive, and had just remembered my name. This was not a house I had discovered. It was a home that had remembered me into being. A role waited for me here, one that had never truly vanished, only folded itself into the walls until I arrived. And I, Ayla Aster, would begin to unfold it. One room at a time, one relic at a time, one story at a time. Chapter 4. The Archivist's Key. I didn't know when I first held the key that it was more than a symbol. It was a map. Not drawn in lines or etched in directions, but whispered into instinct. It pulled, not with urgency, but with certainty. A gentle guidance, like a thread tugging at the hem of my thoughts. For days, if days existed here, I wandered the manor. I did not count the hours. Time bent in strange ways within these walls. Some evenings lasted minutes, some mornings stretched on until the sun forgot it had risen. But always the key called me forward, until at last it led me down a staircase I had somehow never noticed before. It curved into the earth like a secret. The walls were lined in stone, veined with crystal, glowing faintly blue beneath the surface. I held no candle. I needed none. The light came from within the house itself. At the bottom, a great iron door. It had no handle, only a keyhole. When I fit the archivist's key into its mouth, it turned with a softness that belied the weight of centuries. The door did not creak. It sighed, like parchment unfolding. The chamber beyond was not grand. It was reverent. A low-ceilinged room, round like the inside of a globe, with cabinets built into every wall. Each one bore a symbol, etched in brass, worn smooth in places. Signs I didn't yet understand. Moons, runes, constellations. A lock on each, but no labels. A long table sat at the center, scattered with journals and storybooks in every imaginable hand. Some elegant, some hurried, some fading, some newly inked. I saw my name written once. Just once, in the corner of an open page, next to the words, "Arrival confirmed." And beside it, a quill. Long, iridescent, the color of stormlight and crow feathers. It sat in a stand made of bone and brass, upright and waiting. When I stopped near, it lifted. Not entirely, just slightly, as if curious. When I reached out, it came to life. Not with fluttering or flourish, but with purpose. It dipped itself into a small glass vial of ink and began to write, though no hand guided it. At first, I thought it was recording my thoughts. Then I realized it was remembering the manor, detailing everything I had seen, every door I had passed, every whisper I had heard. It recorded the scent of the lavender halls, the shimmer of constellations in the observatory, the silver comb in the passageway. My memories were not mine alone. They were being archived. This was not merely a house. It was a vessel for memory, for stories too strange for shelves, too sacred for history books. And this room, this chamber, was its heart. I walked the perimeter slowly, running my fingers along the aged cabinet handles. One, when I touched it, buzzed gently, recognizing me, or perhaps assessing me. I did not try to open it. Not yet. I understood then I was not the first. Others had come before me. Other archivists, keepers, rememberers. Some had stayed for a lifetime. Some had vanished before their task was done. Their records lined the table. Their scripts danced across the volumes. I could feel them in the quiet. Neither ghosts nor echoes, but legacies. Threads woven into the tapestry I had just begun to touch. I was not here to begin the work. I was here to continue it. To carry the lantern through the dark halls of forgotten things. To name what had been lost. To give breath to relics whose time had stilled. To hold memory in my hands and offer it back to the world, wrapped in story. And when I looked at the quill once more, now still and resting in its stand, I whispered, "I'm ready." Even if I wasn't, because the manor had chosen me. The key had turned, the stories had begun. Chapter 5. The First Relic. There was a hush in the manor the morning it appeared. I had begun to understand the rhythm of this place. Not the ticking of clocks, but the way the light fell through certain windows when a new discovery was near. That morning it struck gold across the solarium floor, catching the dust in midair and wrapping the room in a gentle shimmer. The solarium was always warm, even on gray days, but this morning the warmth had a pulse, a beckoning. The relic was waiting on the marble bench beneath the rose-draped archway, wrapped in deep maroon velvet and sealed with a wax emblem. An ancient sun surrounded by sigils I could not yet read. It rested like something left by time itself. I had been in the room just yesterday. It had not been there then. I knelt before it instinctively. My fingertips hovered above the cloth, trembling, not with fear, but with excitement. This wasn't a trinket or antique. This was a relic, and it had chosen to reveal itself. The moment I touched the bundle, warmth coursed through my fingers. The wax seal shimmered and dissolved into gold dust. The velvet unwrapped on its own. Nestled inside was a key. Brass, delicate, beautiful. The shaft was lined with fine golden filigree shaped like sun rays. At its center gleamed a translucent amber stone, glowing faintly from within as if lit by a dawn trapped behind glass. I barely touched it. The world shifted. Suddenly I stood at the edge of a vast desert beneath a sky soaked in orange twilight. A temple loomed in the distance, broken but magnificent, its towers aglow with embers that danced on the wind. I felt the heat of long-forgotten suns and a pulse in the ground, rhythmic and ancient. A woman stood before me, cloaked in silk and flame, her voice a memory that had been waiting for me. Every light has its echo, every ending a spark. And just as quickly, I was back. The solarium swam into focus. My breath caught. The key still rested in my hand, warm and pulsing gently like a heart remembering how to beat. This was no ordinary object. It was the past. Alive. The house knew. It had given it to me. I carried the key to the archive chamber, where the recording quill had already stirred itself awake. The great tome lay open on the desk, blank and waiting. Relic entry number 1, the Sunkeeper's Key. Location discovered, solarium, beneath Rose Arch. Description, brass key of ornate design, embedded with solar motif and amber gemstone. Warm to the touch, emits faint glow in darkness. Known origin, Temple of the Twin Suns, long believed to be myth. Initial contact, induced vision, priestess bearing likeness of ancient sun deity. Suspected properties, memory trigger, guardian vessel, possibly unlocks sealed knowledge or celestial passage. Relic status, active, responsive, resonant. As I signed the page, the ink shimmered and cooled. The manor's seal emerged faintly at the corner, like breath upon glass. I looked up at the key resting in the drawer before me, now wrapped in silk and nestled into its velvet cradle. A relic with a name, a voice, a memory. The Sunkeeper's Key was the first. It would not be the last. Chapter 6. Letters to the Past. I placed the Sunkeeper's key into its cabinet as one would lay a child in a cradle. Carefully, with a silent promise to protect. The velvet-lined drawer slid shut, its brass handle catching the firelight like a wink from the manor itself. A quiet click followed, though I hadn't locked it. Some things, it seemed, were kept not with bolts, but with trust. That night I could not sleep. The fire had long faded in the hearth, yet I stayed in the archive chamber, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of rosemary and rosewood, the scent of comfort tucked into woven threads. The manor was still, not silent, never silent, but humming in its sleep like a cat curled beside its keeper. My thoughts drifted, as they often did, not toward the relics, but to the women I had left behind. My mother and sister. They were not absent from my life, only out of reach, as though on the other side of a mirror I could no longer touch. I missed my sister's laughter, all lace and thunder, and my mother's tea rituals, always precise, always warm. I missed being someone's daughter, someone's sibling. I missed being part of a world that no longer recognized me. So I wrote. I began keeping letters in a small drawer of my writing desk, addressed to them, but never stamped. The act was not to inform, but to tether. A thread between my present and my past, however frayed. Dearest Isadora, today I found a key that sang like sunlight. Mother, I am not lost. I have simply walked a path that I never knew was mine. I poured my heart into parchment, my ink into memory, and the manor, ever watchful, responded. That was when the reflections began. In the east hallway, a gilded mirror once dulled by age had cleared overnight. I passed it in haste one morning and saw, not myself as I was, but as I had once been. Barefoot, wild-haired, clutching a folio of pressed flowers from the garden. She stared back at me with wide eyes full of wonder, and I realized she was not a stranger. She was the part of me that had waited years to be remembered. In the west wing, behind a bookcase that shifted without warning, I found a doorway. Not a room, just a threshold of fog and candlelight. And beyond it, glimpses. My sister at her piano, my mother stitching embroidery by lamplight. Frozen moments as though the manor held not just relics, but echoes. Some called it memory. I began to think of it as mercy. These glimpses didn't wound me, they soothed. They remind me that I had not severed my past. I had expanded it. I hadn't fled. I had become. And in those quiet evenings as I folded each unsent letter and sealed it with dried lavender, I felt it in my bones. I was not the first woman to walk this path between worlds, but I might be the first to do so while writing home. Chapter 7. Inheritance of the Forgotten. It began with a heartbeat. Not mine, but the manor's. I had come to recognize the subtle rhythms of this place, the whisper of ash in the hearth before it stirs, the soft creak of floorboards that announce a thought before it becomes form. But this was different. A low thrum, steady and certain, pulling me downward like a lullaby coaxing a child into a dream. The sound led me past the archive chamber, beyond the solarium, through a velvet-curtained hallway I could have sworn did not exist the day before. The walls here were lined with empty portrait frames, as if waiting for faces not yet remembered. At the end stood a door, smaller than most, arched like a chapel window, carved with ivy and hourglasses. When I opened it, the hush was so complete it pressed against my skin. Inside, the air felt older, thicker. It shimmered faintly as though saturated with breath long exhaled. This was not simply a room. It was a vault. A sanctum sealed by memory itself. The walls were lined with mirrors, but none of them showed me. Each pane held a different figure, frozen in some quiet moment. A man in Renaissance robes dusting a celestial globe. A young girl in Regency dress, writing beneath starlight. A cloaked figure from the 1600s with ink-stained fingers and a quill behind one ear. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of them. All different, all familiar. all archivists. They did not speak, and yet I heard them. Not in words, but in impressions, in scents, images, fragments of stories not yet told. The girl in green hummed a tune I recognized from my grandmother's lullabies. The scholar from the Enlightenment passed a hand through a relic and smiled at me. The echoes of their presence were tender, not haunting. They were not lost souls, they were legacy. In the center of the room stood a pedestal. Upon it, a ledger bound in what looked like oak bark and stitched with golden thread. Its title shimmered when I brushed my fingers across the cover. Lineage of the Forgotten. Inside were names, written in every language I knew, and many I did not. Some scratched in haste, some lettered in perfect calligraphy. Some pages bore only fingerprints or pressed herbs, but all of them had held this post, this burden, this blessing. I turned to a blank page near the end and saw my name already written in faded ink. Ayla Aster, appointed by Echo, keeper of the 12th hour. I don't know who Echo was. Perhaps a former archivist, perhaps something else entirely. But I knew as surely as I had ever known anything that Morphos Manor had been waiting. That I was one of many, and still, uniquely chosen. That my duty was not to rewrite the past, but to remember what the world had forgotten. When I stepped out of the vault, the velvet curtain fell back into place on its own. The hallway was gone. I was still in this world, but no longer only of it. Chapter 8. The Archivist's Vow. Night fell slowly over Morphos Manor, as if time itself were reluctant to move forward. The final rays of dusk filtered through the stained glass windows of the great hall, casting fractured constellations across the floor, stars not charted by any astronomer, but relics. Their shapes and sigils shimmered in the old glass, a sword encircled by roses, a broken crown aflame, a mirror framed with thorns. I did not yet know their names, but I could feel their weight in the room, as though they were watching, remembering. I stood in the center of the hall, holding the unlit lantern in my hands. The walls here rose impossibly high, lined with carved balconies and bookcases that spiraled toward the ceiling like cathedral ribs. The air smelled of wax, stone, and something older than fire, something ancient and alive. At the far end of the chamber was the archivist's table, broad, worn, luminous with use. I had polished its surface once already, not because it was dusty, but because it felt like a ritual. A preparing of place. Now it was time. I struck the match and touched the flame to the lantern's wick. It flared to life, amber, quiet, steady. I carried it slowly to the table and placed it at the center, beside the brass inkwell and the untouched sheaf of parchment. A warm draft stirred around me, though no window was open. The manor breathed. And then I spoke. Not loudly, not with grandeur, but with the certainty that comes from remembering something your soul has known all along. I vowed to protect memory, to preserve magic, and to honor all that time forgets. The stained glass windows brightened, just slightly, as though the stars within them had heard and approved. The table beneath my hands grew warm. Not burning, welcoming. The ink shimmered in its bottle. The walls seemed to lean in, attentive. I was not alone in this promise. I stood still for a long while, listening to the soft hum of the manor, the low crackle of the lantern, and the quiet rhythm of my own heartbeat. Outside, the world continued, unaware. But here, something sacred had been set into motion. And I knew then, this is not the story of what I left behind. This is the story of what I remember. And what, now, I am bound to keep. Epilogue, the quiet between the pages. Sometimes, in the stillest hour of night, I walk the halls of Morphos Manor with no lamp and no destination. The corridors know my steps now. They do not creak or question. The portraits along the walls, those whose names I have not yet learned, seem to soften when I pass, as though they too remember. There are stories here I have not yet opened, drawers that hum with silence, cabinets sealed with sigils I do not yet know how to speak, but I do not rush. For I have learned that magic does not yield to haste. It requires presence, patience, and reverence. I drink my tea beside the hearth, reading the letters I once wrote but never sent. I visit the solarium where the Sunkeeper's key first shimmered in the light of memory. I press my hand against the window panes and watch as seasons pass, like breath on glass, always shifting, never gone. The world outside continues, its clocks and cities, its days of noise and motion. I think of it often. I do not long to return, but I do not resent it either. It made me. It called me here. And now within these walls that breathe and remember, I answer that call with ink and page. I have begun recording the stories, those tucked inside relics, those whispered through shadowed corridors, those that arrive as dreams. Each one is a thread, and I am the weaver, not the first, not the last, simply the current keeper of the loom. The manor still surprises me. A new door appears behind the curtain in the observatory. A drawer unlocks on its own. A relic glows faintly when I pass. I smile when these things happen, not with fear, but with familiarity, as if the house is gently reminding me, you are not alone in your remembering. Sometimes I wonder if anyone outside still says my name, if somewhere out there a letter sits unopened, if my mother ever walks past the east garden path and feels the hush I once did. But I do not dwell there long. There are many stories here, unspoken, unfinished, unwilling to be forgotten. And I am their archivist. I sit at the desk by the arched window. The quill stirs before I reach for it. The lantern flickers in quiet anticipation. The parchment waits. And so, I begin again.